So we're really glad to be here, and just special thanks to OTPS for having us, and also a shout out to the Community Foundation. Don't lose your beer.
No, I keep doing that.
Community Foundation who gave us a grant to help us support some of these talks that we've been doing around the community. So I'm going to start off with a little welcome and a quick introduction, and I'll turn it over to my dad so he can talk about his experience during the Civil Rights Movement. And then I'll come back and talk a little bit about Rocket City civil rights and what our initiatives are right now, and why this is such important work for us to be doing currently. So this is a picture of me and my dad. So I would have taken a bet from Josh when we planned this that you'd be wearing that shirt. I would definitely want a beer. It's a really important talk for us because I've given lots of talks and he's given lots of talks, but this is our first time getting to do a talk together. So it's a really special right. How about that? So I will turn this over to you.
Without the mic, can you hear me? Do I need the mic? Do I need the mic?
Just hold it down there.
You're fine. You're fine.
It helps little.
No desire.
You guys don't know that.
Okay, well, as she said, it's a real pleasure to be here. I do a lot of speaking at schools and churches and civic groups and things like that. And when I speak at the school, sometimes it's as young, sometimes as young as children at the Montessori schools. And some of them are like 5 years old. So it's kind of a difficult message to get across to 5-year-olds, because they don't really understand a lot about prejudice or bigotry, those kinds of words. But even at 5 or 6, they understand basic concepts of being nice or being mean, of being fair or being unfair. So a lot of times I'll start off with little kids, I'll start off with something like this. I'll say, how many of you like ice cream? And of course, pretty much all kids like ice cream. I say, how many of you have blue eyes? And how many of you have brown eyes? And different set of hands, And so I'll say, now, what if your teacher, when you came in the morning, what if your teacher said, if you have blue eyes, we're going to go over here to this other room and eat ice cream and play video games. But if you have brown eyes, you have to stay here and do your schoolwork. I said, now, would that be fair? And every time I do that, all of the kids always shout out that that would not be fair, right? That's one interesting thing about it, is even the kids with blue eyes say that would not be fair. The other thing that's interesting is that if you can get them to see that you shouldn't treat people differently because of the color of their eyes, it's not much of a jump to get them to see that you shouldn't treat people differently because of the color of their skin. So if I can get them with the ice cream example, I'm halfway there, getting the message across to them. But anyway, and they all seem to get it pretty well. So this is a picture of my dad. Now, this is different than what you're going to put on the... No? Okay, I thought you had two separate... Oh, it blends, okay. All right. That's a picture. That's a picture of my dad. And Beth's agenda said my civil rights experiences, but my experiences started with his experiences. He was born in 1931 here in Madison County. And it was the things that my dad had to put up with that made him not want his children to have to put up with those same things. So like I said, here he was about 6 years old. I have those same skinny legs, by the way. If you're familiar with North Huntsvill, with where Max Luther crosses the Parkway, it used to be, if you stood at that intersection and looked west, up Max Luther, there was a Dairy Queen up the hill on your left. There you go. Dairy Queen. That's exactly. That Dairy Queen is exactly where Dad's house was when he was a child. Okay. Now, where he went to school was right where the Huntsvill Public Library is right now. So I measured it one time in the car. It was about 6.5 miles, something like that. And the black children, Dad and his brother, the black children had to walk to school 6.5 miles each way, even though there were school buses that ran along parts of that route. And even though black families had to pay taxes, just like white families did, black children were not allowed on the school bus. I'm going to get some water. Yeah, Okay, so let's see here. There we go. Now, so like I was saying, and this is my dad when he was about 14 or so. Oh, little side story. The lady that's right behind him, I put that picture on Facebook one time, and one of my friends who lives in Colorado, she said, I think that's my mother when she was a little girl. And so I asked my dad, and he told me her name, and I asked the lady, and she said, yeah, that's my mom. And she didn't have any pictures of her mom from a little girl. So that's it. And I told Dad, I said, you know, you look like you're about 10. And he said, no, he knows that he was 14 because that's when he met that woman. He said, that girl. That was his first girlfriend, and she was his first, that was his first girlfriend, and she was his, well, you know what I'm trying to say. He was her first boyfriend, you know. But, so anyway, there's a little side story and, you know, the power of Facebook and stuff like that. But again, when he was a child, that's what he had to do. And the school buses ran along the route, couldn't ride the school buses. And worse than that, that's you know, in dusty Alabama weather, the school bus would kick dust up in the faces of the black children that were walking. And worse than that, the white children on the school bus would throw stuff out the window at the black kids that were walking along the route. And worse than that, Dad said the bus driver would slow down when they got close to the black kids so the white kids could aim better, throw pieces of their lunch or whatever it was at the black kids that were walking along the route. So that's the world that he grew up in, you know. And you know, it's not always easy to change things like that. As I don't have to explain to you. It's not like people could just make a decision and things were going to change. It took a long time and a lot of fighting, and a lot of courageous people, a lot of planning, and a lot of courageous people. My mouth is really dry. Anyway, so Dad knew from the time that he was in grade school that he wanted to be a doctor. But the all-black school that he had to go to, the only school for black children in Huntsvill, didn't have adequate facilities to teach him what he needed to know to be a doctor. For example, they didn't have any kind of chemistry lab. They didn't even have a cafeteria, no playground equipment, okay, no library. They had a few secondhand books, hand-me-downs from the white schools. But so he actually ordered a chemistry set so that he could teach himself. He mail ordered a chemistry set to teach himself chemistry so that he could learn enough. He knew he would need that in order to be a doctor. And let's see now, if I fast forward to 1956, when Dad started his medical, let me say, he ordered catalogs from Alabama and from Auburn, okay? He applied to Alabama and Auburn because that way he could get catalogs from those schools. Now he knew he wasn't going to get in because right there on the application it asked about your race. And if you put in for Negro, you were not going to get in. But by applying, he was able to get catalogs, and he looked at what kind of pre-med classes he needed to take to get into med school, right? So he used the information that he got from those catalogs, and he went to what was then Alabama A&M College. It's now, of course, A&M University. But that's where he went. He focused on the classes that he needed, and he did so well, he got accepted into medical school after 2 years. Which to me is, unless some sort of child prodigy, you don't hear things like that. You don't get into medical school after 2 years. You know? He was able to do that. So he graduated from Meharry Medical School in Nashville. And by the way, when he got his doctorate, he got his bachelor's, his master's, and his doctorate all at the same time. Because he never finished undergrad school, you know, so he got all of that stuff at the same time. But he started his practice here in Huntsvill in 1956, the year before I was born. And he practiced at Huntsvill Hospital, which wasn't the big, you know, expanse that it is now. It was one building, basically. But and it was a segregated hospital. There was one big room where they treated black patients. And Dad said that room had to be the emergency room, the operating room, and the delivery room, you know, for black patients. That's what that room served as. And Dad said there would be times when a patient who had been prepped for surgery scheduled for weeks, would be up on the table And if an emergency case came in, like someone in a car wreck or a lady about to have a baby, they'd have to take that first patient down off the table, take care of the emergency, and then get back to the surgery. Even though there were adjacent rooms that were empty, but those were for white patients only. Okay? But so that's the kind of environment he had to work. He went to work in. Wasn't able to be a member of the board at the hospital at first. He finally did appeal. There were only 2 black doctors in town at that time, but he finally did appeal, and he was allowed to be on the board. And they told him that he could come to the meetings, but the meeting started at 6:30. They served dinner at 6, or something like this, but they served dinner at 6. The meeting started at 6:30, and they told him to show up at 6:30. Don't show up at 6 and have dinner with the other doctors, you know? And they told him that, they said, now when you get here, turn your coffee cup upside down so that the hostess won't accidentally pour you a cup of coffee. Okay. That's what he had to deal with. And I tell you these things, and there are dozens more stories, but just so you get an idea of what the environment was that he had to put up with, and what made him determine that his children would not grow up in that same kind of environment. So this is what a lot of Huntsvill was like, and other places too, especially in the South. But a lot of places were like this. This is what you would see. At some public places, there would be restrooms for white men, white women, colored men, and colored women. And sometimes, like at the a gas station or something, it might be white men, white women, and colored. And so men and women had to use the same bathroom, you know. And you women probably know that that's not too pleasant. But anyway, but that again, that's what it was like here in Huntsvill. These stores, if you went into a store, if a black person went to a store, you could go into most stores, as far as I know, most stores. But if you tried anything on, you bought it. You could not try anything on and then put it back up on the rack. A black person could not do that. Okay? And one of the things I learned from a book that I'm going to show you a little bit later is that the way that black mothers bought shoes for their children, they'd have a child stand on a piece of paper and draw an outline of the child's foot. And that's what she would take to the store to buy shoes for the child. Because the child couldn't, like I said, if you tried it on, you bought it. You know, no matter what. So that's the way things were. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of people here in Huntsville who weren't happy about that, especially black people, but some white people as well. There were some, I think some of you here might not have been too happy with the way that things were, you know, back then. But so we started organizing in the early 60s. We started organizing, we started doing things like poster walks, as you can see. This is downtown Huntsville, and I'm not sure, I think this might be like in front of Woolworths or something that we used to have, and I'm not sure about that, but it's definitely downtown Huntsville. That gentleman in the front, let's see, that guy, that's Reverend Ezekiel Bell, and he was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement, along with my dad and a few others. And he's carrying a sign that says, I ordered a hamburger and was served a warrant. Because what happened, one of the protests that we did was sit-ins at the lunch counters. So like Woolworths had a lunch counter, and they probably had, I don't know, 8 or 10 stools there. And so we would take 8 or 10 people in there and sit down and take up every stool. You know, if they weren't going to serve us, they weren't going to serve anybody. And that was just one of the types of protests that we did. And they could not arrest you just for walking in there and sitting down. Now, they didn't have to serve you, and if they asked you to leave and you didn't leave, you could be arrested. And thus, I ordered a hamburger and was served a warrant. Now, there I am at about 4.5 years old with a sign that says, youngsters like freedom too. So, and by the way, these pictures are a little blurry because I snagged them from a video, and I don't have any professional equipment or anything like that. So, but I think you can kind of make it out. Now, that's a picture of my mom. She and another lady here in town, Mrs. Joan Cashin, who was the wife of Dr. John Cashin. They allowed themselves to be arrested for going in and sitting at a lunch counter. They wanted to be arrested. They wanted the publicity that came with being arrested. And sure enough, they went in there, and they were asked to leave, and they were arrested. And there was media there to capture some of that. You know, we made sure that there was media there to capture some, the best we could. We couldn't really tell the media what to do. But anyway, so Mom and Mrs. Cashin and another lady whose name was Frances Sims, she was an Alabama A&M student, and she had been arrested like a half dozen times before, so she knew the drill. And she went with the ladies to kind of keep them comfortable and to make sure that they weren't going to panic or anything like that. But I mean, these were two, a doctor's wife and a dentist's wife, not used to being arrested, you know. But Frances Sims, like I said, she knew the drill. So the three of them got arrested. And I asked Mom, you know, what it was like. And Mom said that and I don't remember if it was the sheriff or the chief of police or whoever it was, but she said that they begged those ladies to leave. They did not want them there. And as I recall, it was about election time. Elections were coming up, you know, and so they sort of used that because, and the authorities didn't want any trouble. They didn't want any, you know, so they tried to get them to go home, but my mother and Mrs. Cashin and Frances refused to go home. They spent the night in jail. And that got some publicity beyond just local. It was difficult for us to even get local publicity because the local newspaper and so on, they wouldn't cover, a lot of times, they wouldn't cover some of the civil rights activities. But this got regional attention. And so this helped to move things along as far as negotiations with the city officials, school board and the city officials. Oh, and my dad wanted to have, when Mom and Dad got engaged, he wanted to have her picture in the Huntsvill Times, and he took it down there. And he said, the guy at the Huntsvill Times said, he said, Dr. Hereford, do you know what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to destroy the society page of the Huntsvill Times. So he said, if I put your wife's picture, your bride's, your fiance's picture in there, no other Huntsvill couple will ever want their pictures in the paper again. And he said, he told my father, he said, if you'll bring me a paper from Atlanta or Birmingham, he said, or even from New York or Chicago, that shows black fiancés or brides on the same page with white fiancés. He says, if you'll do that, I'll put that picture in there. And the way my father told the story, he said, there's no telling how much money I spent. He could not find a newspaper, even from up north, that did that at that time. Back in, this would have been in the 50s. He could not find a newspaper that had black and white on the same society page. Okay, so we knew that some things had to be done. The movement had been going on for months, beating our heads against the wall. I should say there, because I was just a young child. I wasn't involved in the planning or anything like that. But beating their heads against the wall, and they finally realized that they weren't making much progress. To give you an example, when it came to school, integrating the schools, we were successful getting the issue of integrating the schools on the school board agenda. And then the school board would meet. They put our item last on the agenda. They'd have their meeting. They'd go through all the items while our people sat there. They'd go through all the items. They'd get down to that last item. Somebody on the board would make a motion to adjourn. Somebody else would second it. It would pass unanimously, and they'd all get up and walk out and leave us sitting there in the room. All right? So things like that were going on. You know, you weren't getting anywhere with the city council or with the mayor. And of course, all of the authorities were white at that time. Weren't getting anywhere with them. So somebody decided we need to bring somebody here to town who's an influential person who can bring some attention to what's going on here in Huntsvill, beyond just our local people, you know. So they decided to ask Dr. King to come here in 1962. They asked Dr. King. And Dr. King was not as famous in 60.